Everyone should have co-host privileges, but I can double check that.
Yeah, I see it now. Sorry, I'm I'm still confused sometimes by the Zoom UI compared to Google Meets.
No worries.
All right, so welcome everyone to the analytics section meeting. I think I have the only topic today. And I wanted to kind of quickly talk about the proof of concept around Snowplow as a potential Jitsi replacement. I can maybe show it to you very quickly so that it's a bit more clear to everyone what we're talking about. I don't know if everyone checked the MR beforehand. And then I think there's already a bunch of good questions. So I think I really wanted to use this opportunity to get some input around potential blockers, thoughts that people have around this. So I think just to give kind of the right context to everyone, why we even did this, because I don't know how aware everyone was. So I think in general, there's been some reservations around, okay, how scalable is Jitsi, how supported will it be in the long run, because it's a pretty new startup, and a bunch of those kinds of considerations around Jitsi. There was an investigation into, okay, how much would it take to completely replace it and build something similar from scratch, which turned out to be quite a long time. But then there's also Snowplow, which we already use on the product intelligence side for our event tracking right now in the GitLab monolith. And so the idea came up whether we could theoretically use Snowplow as a Jitsi replacement, because it's a lot more mature. It has been around for a long time, I think around about 10 years now, maybe even more. We use it ourselves, so we know that it's scalable at least to GitLab's scale without a lot of problems, so we don't have any kind of infrastructure concerns really with it. And so we wanted to investigate that, and in order to do that, I tried to build a proof of concept to mainly answer two questions. So one of them was kind of, how would we do local development, or how could it be even packageable as a single entity, as for example a Kubernetes setup or something? Because the Snowplow docs, they focus a lot around using Snowplow on one of the existing public clouds. So there's a lot of documentation around, okay, you can deploy it on AWS, you can deploy it on GCP, but it always then uses some GCP or AWS specific queuing system. And we wanted to figure out, okay, is it transportable in the way that we want it to be, so that we can theoretically deploy it on any cloud or any cluster that you could think of? That's one question. The other one is, how do we get data from Snowplow into ClickHouse? Because there's also no obvious answer. There's a bunch of loaders around Snowplow. So how do you get events into different database systems like Postgres, BigQuery, Snowflake? But there's no official kind of loader into ClickHouse. And so we wanted to answer those two questions. There's no decision being made around replacing Jitsi at all. This is for now an investigation, but I think we're now at a point where we can move closer to making an actual decision. So if it's okay with everyone, I would quickly share my screen to show you everyone how it works, so that we kind of have a similar understanding. Can you see the screen? All right, so this is kind of a drawing of how the general setup of Snowplow right now works. So I connected it to my local GDK. In the future, it could be connected to GitLab or any other kind of thing. Snowplow always consists of two main Snowplow things. Or servers. So the services, that's the Snowplow collector. So that's the thing that the service that the events get sent to. So it mostly just kind of takes events and validates, I think, very briefly whether it's generally an event or not an event, and then puts them into a queue, into a queuing system. I'm currently using RabbitMQ for this, for the proof of concept. In theory, in our deployed Snowplow version, we're using Amazon Kinesis. It also supports a bunch of other queuing systems. So it puts them into a raw queue. Then another process takes over, which is the so-called Snowplow enricher. That takes these raw events and can apply things to it. So one thing that we are currently doing in GitLab itself is pseudonymizing I hope I put it right. Some data from the user. So for example, the user's ID or the URL, so that we are more privacy compliant. You can also do something like IP address anonymization. And then it's put into enriched queue, which then can deliver it out. So in the enriched queue, all these events are actually just tab separated values. Like it's one line of tab separated values, which you then can pick up. In the proof of concept, what I'm doing is ClickHouse has a RabbitMQ loader, so it can just take events directly from a RabbitMQ queue. You can tell it, okay, this is a queue, look for lines there, and whatever lines come up, it can ingest. So that's how it generally works. So what it's doing now is so you can maybe see it here. Is that, so should I zoom in a bit maybe? Is that readable?
That's all right.
Okay, so this is how these events look like. So maybe this already answers some questions. So Snowplow has a general kind of column structure of events, which is always, I think, the same. I think these are around about 120-ish different columns. There's a lot of things like some user IDs, theoretically some things that you can derive from the IP if you want, the page URLs, a lot of stuff. And a lot of it might not be filled actually. I think the most important thing is that are these contexts. So what you see here, this is where you can apply your own schema to, and where you can enforce certain things, where you can tell Snowplow that events need to have, I don't know, for example, a user ID of your service. So a GitLab.com user ID needs to be sent with them, otherwise they're not real events. Or yeah, whatever you want. So this is where you can enforce things around the events. There's a bunch of things that clearly show that Snowplow has been around for some time. There's stuff like whether Silverlight or Flash is enabled in this browser. So it clearly has been there for some time. And if I go back, so these are ordered by time now. You can see the latest one is from a few minutes ago. If I click around here, I hope this works now, demo time, and do a few page views. There should be, where am I? Getting a bit confused by the Zoom UI. So now there's new events from this minute, so from 15:09 UTC time zone. You can see there's a bunch of new events that came in, which are mostly then, in this case, just page views or also specific events that we're sending. So I think that should hopefully give a kind of general overview of how this is working. And again, I think for now, like the question is, okay, for us that we need to answer is this a viable replacement? The advantages that Snowplow would give us are, again, the maturity. One big advantage on the product intelligence side is that they have a lot of different SDKs we could package up. So they have a Ruby SDK, which we're using currently, but they also have Go SDKs, Python SDKs, like a lot of SDKs that we could just use, which would be a lot of less work that we would need to do compared, for example, to Jitsu, which doesn't have that many pre-built SDKs to just use. All right. I hope that gave a good impression. And I think there's already a few questions around this.
Yeah, I had the first one, which actually Mikolaj has succinctly answered for me already, but I'll voice it anyway. We have in product analytics, we have the concept, we started thinking a while ago about having a common taxonomy, because eventually we'd like to be able to retrieve data not just from front end page views, but also back end events, just like you've just been showing actually with the Snowplow stuff. And you'd want it in a unified schema, a way that the same data, whether it's coming from back end or front end, it will look the same. So it's easier to analyze on the analytical bit on the front when we actually give it over to the users. So Snowplow, I was asking if Snowplow gives us that full control. Jitsu doesn't, and many other collecting schemas don't give you that full control. They hide a lot of things behind their collectors, the way the collector's built. Mikolaj has already responded to this, saying that they give you the ability to custom build your own schemas, which is great. That is for the JavaScript tracker, though. Does that also apply to all the other SDKs as well, or is it just for the JavaScript side?
It applies to every SDK. The Snowplow provides few types of events. The one that Basti was presenting was currently used by the GitLab, which is a canonical event, which has a bunch of columns, way more than we might want to use, like marketing ones, which might be confusing. GitLab also was using this custom self-describing events, but we dropped the support only because we lacked of a policy when and why to define these events. But for the purpose of the analytics, the way I would see it is that analytics can use those defined events to define the schema and then only present this schema to the end users. So that would alleviate the problem that we were trying to escape from, where we have like 10 different schemas. Each of the groups had their own schema. They were not matching each other. And we kind of went, okay, there's the only one schema you can use, and you can only customize the contexts. So we have like the common, at least common attributes that all the events has, but it's possible to build the event completely from the scratch, and it's regardless of the SDK used.
Brilliant. Well, that's a +1 to using Snowplow from my perspective.
Maybe adding to that, so what they have on their roadmap, I mean, I don't know if we can ever use that, but it's kind of interesting, is the idea, if you do this, that you then can even create custom SDKs. So if you have like a bunch of events that are described in a certain way, and if it's like, okay, this event always needs to have those kinds of things, then for example, TypeScript or any kind of typed languages, but in general, you could create a SDK or automatically create types, for example, for the SDK, so that only certain values can be put in as a event name, for example, or you can verify that an event ID would always need to be a number or a string, depending on what you have. That's on the roadmap. I think that's not currently there yet, but this is, for example, just to show what would be possible with those kinds of things.
And it looks like we have to submit those schemas to an external open public body as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, which is actually beneficial for us, because one thing product analytics will be looking to do eventually is opening up the ability for customers to use their own stack, not just the stack that's built into GitLab.com, but their own personal stacks. So having a way of being able to share a schema that anyone can connect and look at would be very useful. Which kind of brings me to my next point, actually. Looking at the proof of concept, the way product analytics currently works is it's a GitLab.com owned instance. The stack is owned by us, but as I said, we will be looking to give users the ability to set up their own. And the way it works is you click a button, and in the background, we start off a worker which sends an API call to Jitsu to create a new project in Jitsu, which then creates a new table in ClickHouse under that GitLab project's ID. And then Cube will, when it goes to query, it will query against that specific ID. And we also get out an API key that's used for the collector to send data only to that Jitsu project and no other project. If that makes sense. I'm assuming that going down the Snowplow route will mean that we won't have this one-step automated process. We will actually manually have to set up each of these individual elements. I mean, pragmatically, we're not going to go around and click buttons, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's my understanding. So we would need to build this kind of ourselves. I think there's a lot of ways to do this, so it shouldn't be a blocker. Just for example, for understanding, so for even when you put the data into ClickHouse, what it's currently doing is kind of, there's this queuing table, which you cannot even look at, which then you create separate tables where you take a materialist view that puts the data from the queue into the actual table. So you could imagine a system where for every project that gets created, a new table gets created, a new materialized view that only takes the events that correspond to this this ID, this project ID from the table, and then puts them into this actual table. So there's just to say there's ways to build it, but we definitely would need to build some stuff there ourselves. It's not built into the system yet.
Does Snowplow have any way of filtering that out? So if I don't have a valid like SDK ID, for example, will it go through that process automatically through the like? How do we filter out noise if people are trying to like send bogus events or BDOS us or something like that? Or would we have to build something in front of that?
Yeah, I think we can. Like one easy way would building our own enricher. So with an enricher, you can always kind of filter between bad events and good events. So it's like the raw events go into the queue, but then we can say, okay, based on some database query or something that we do, or like a Reddit, like some list that we have of these are applicable project IDs or something like that, then we could filter them into good events and bad events. It automatically filters out any like not correctly structured events. So those would be automatically, so there's a bad queue automatically that any unstructured events go into. That's something that we already have set up, for example, on GitLab.com. And I think that's around 60,000 events per day currently that go in there. Out of some reason, to be honest, I didn't check kind of deeply into that yet. But this is like anything that's completely malformed or doesn't apply to the schema you defined, that would just be thrown out.
Okay, so it has to enter our pipeline before we can actually filter it out. Jitsu. Yeah, so we have that validation in the front. Okay, yeah, so we'd have to build something if we wanted that in the front then. Okay.
Yeah. If it would have, yeah.
We have the JavaScript SDK, so we could build something into that, I guess, having some kind of checker that's outside of the main queuing system.
Yeah. So I think this is also probably a load question. So if this is kind of a potential problem for your queuing system, I mean, Snowplow, I think, yeah.
Only way could be so think the product analytics right now, the current queue for Snowplow is GitLab only, GitLab.com only, more or less, isn't it? 60,000 events. Product analytics using the shared, I guess you could call it shared stack, would be, whatever that project's product is, their main website of millions of views a day or whatever, times that by how many customers make use of this, and they will have multiple products, multiple projects that are connected to this theoretically, not just one. So we need to think that not only does this, we need to, from a product analytics point of view, we need to make it so the stack is recreatable or siloed in some way, so we're not spreading data, someone else's data, in mixing it in with everyone else's, if it's on a shared stack. But more importantly, as I said before, we also need to come up with a way of packaging this. So, well, in product analytics, we'll have to think of a way of packaging it so others can run their own version too.
Yeah, but that's exactly what we're trying to, or what I was trying to do with this proof of concept. Because I mean, we currently have around, I think, 40-50 million events per day going into our own Snowplow instance, but that's run on Amazon Kinesis. And so that's not really transportable because you would need to run it on the AWS stack. That's why we tried out RabbitMQ, because in this way it could be like you could just have a Helm chart or something to put the whole thing on a Kubernetes cluster and create a separate instance for every customer or every project or however you want to kind of separate it. I think Nikolai made some research into RabbitMQ, and so why we chose it in this case is because it is easily set up, as you can easily set it up. You don't need, like, you just need one instance of it, and it wasn't, is it like up to 1,000 events per second or something. It's like it doesn't really need a lot of infrastructure thinking, which is roughly kind of our current like GitLab software as a service size. Beyond that, you would need to start thinking about kind of, okay, clustering and things, maybe a bit more. But yeah, so up to that point, it's possible. And you can also, in theory, you could also like set up then a separate system where you say, okay, if you go beyond a certain point, you connect to Amazon Kinesis or Google Cloud PubSub, I guess, if you don't want to kind of take care of the infrastructure with RabbitMQ.
Okay, thank you.
So that, excuse me. So that gets into my point is like moving from this POC, and also maybe is I need an education on what role Snowplow Micro plays, as well as excuse me, are we planning to use RabbitMQ, which is experimental currently, and are we prepared to switch to something like Kafka if we need to? Because the portability and being able to set up your own self-managed cluster, I think is key to our strategy from a product offering standpoint. So, what's the strategy to move this out of POC?
So yeah, I mean, the strategy itself, I think that's something that we would need to decide kind of if we choose to do it. As per like maybe going back to Snowplow Micro, this doesn't play any role in there really. So Snowplow Micro itself is just a tool to test your Snowplow locally with like, we use it, for example, in the GDK right now to kind of be able to test if events are generally going through. It's one Docker container. I don't know if it now sets up an Elasticsearch instance or something that kind of just shows you, okay, these good events came in, these bad events came in. That's it. So I completely replaced Snowplow Micro for this use case. So this is kind of just a Snowplow instance, as you could also set it up in the cloud. And I think for our use case, where we actually want to build an analytics product, we would need to use something like this POC locally and not go with Snowplow Micro. Snowplow Micro just helps you to, like, if you have Snowplow already running in the cloud, verify locally that your events are generally correctly formed and so on.
Yeah, that's how I understood it. But in the merge request, I read it as I reused the existing Snowplow Micro implementation in the monolith to redirect Snowplow events. So I, for some reason, thought it was still in play here. But looking at the Docker file, you can see that the collector and the enricher are there. So I just wasn't sure if Micro was actually in play or not.
Yeah, maybe I didn't put this correctly. So the only thing I did is to make it easy to set up on the GDK side, I left generally Snowplow Micro enabled so that GDK sends out the data to the Snowplow Micro port, but then turned off the Docker command to start Snowplow Micro when GDK starts. So it uses the implementation that we currently have in place in GDK, where in the development mode, it sends things to a certain IP address or to the local host on a certain port. But instead of Snowplow Micro on this port, the POC is sitting.
Got it.
And I mean, I think you made a good point. So the Rabbit, what is experimental are the RabbitMQ enrichers and collectors. So Snowplow announced them, I think, sometime towards the end of last year as experimental. And they, with the same intention that we kind of have, to have something that is theoretically easily to run locally, but also good way to package it up and put it on any kind of cloud. There is active development on those. So the Docker images are getting recreated and they do active development there. There is the chance that they could drop it. As to my understanding right now, everything works as expected. Everything works fine. So there is a possibility for us to, like, if they actually drop it, to take it on. I think also what Mikolai wrote, they have a lot of other possibilities. So there is a way to just put it onto the local file system, your events. I think that's what Jitsu actually is doing right now as well. So you can just stream the events to the local file system into a file, and then from this file, the enricher picks it up and puts it into another file. So for a very minimal use case, you don't even need a queue. For example, for local development, that would probably be enough. And even maybe for small GitLab instances or small products. For bigger products, what they have is Kafka, which I think is, or as far as I understand, is completely mature in their system, so you can use it. There's no like risk of it being dropped anytime soon. As far as I understand, it is a bit more effort to set it up, to my understanding. I never set it up my own, but that's kind of my general understanding that Kafka, I mean, because it's more built to be clusterable, and so from the start, it assumes that you have multiple Kafka nodes and so on. So there's a bit more thinking that is involved. But in theory, you can also set that up in any Kubernetes cluster. So it provides the same portability. It provides everything is the same. And I think if we would move on with Snowplow, there should be another investigation into, okay, should we go with RabbitMQ, or maybe Kafka would be even easier from the start, and it's only me not being familiar with it who rather like picks RabbitMQ.
Yeah, I guess my follow-up question is, I just wonder if that's something we have to figure out before we decide to move with Snowplow in terms of like making sure it is packageable. I mean, RabbitMQ definitely sounds easier from an infrastructure point of view. But yeah, if they decide to drop it, then we don't want to be caught off guard as we're, migrating away from Jitsu and having to reconfigure part of our pipeline there, or like cluster image.
Yeah, I mean, we could move forward, for example, with trying to set up something similar with Kafka. It shouldn't be too much of a hassle to do that also locally, just to verify that it's also not that much more work. Yeah, because I understand, for example, Jitsu, I think they are even kind of also internally building something based on Kafka also, but I'm not 100% sure about that.
Because is using Kafka.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
If their support for RabbitMQ is experimental, are they working anywhere publicly where they're saying like we need to achieve this set of criteria before we mark it as GA or before we decide to cut loose on it? Because if it's just marked experimental, we don't necessarily know why. That's different versus it's experimental, but these are our steps before we sign off on it as fully supported. That might help us make a decision here.
I think they have a public roadmap. Or at least they had. I need to check into it again. To my knowledge, right now, it's kind of okay. This is experimental. We're starting to do it. We're actively developing it. They didn't lay out any kind of what's it called? Criteria around their decision. Yet where I looked, but I think we can definitely dig a bit deeper there to figure this out.
Okay, cool. Because also if we can connect with whatever those teams are that are responsible for this and say, hey, we GitLab are interested in consuming this, that's extra customer and market usage data for them to help prioritize it if that question does come up with them. Is anyone actually even using this?
Yeah, that's something that we could actually do. I think that's actually a question from my side, because I'm not sure how, and I think we're out of time, but I still just want to voice it, because I'm not sure how we are kind of handling this currently with Jitsu, how aware they are of our usage. Because Snowplow, they make their money with deployed Snowplow. Like they make their money with a deployed version of Snowplow that is kind of, okay, you don't need to take care of it. We deploy it into your cloud, into your AWS or GCP account, not your local cloud, but into your GCP account, and we take care of managing it. So I'm curious also about kind of the relationship aspect of, okay, would we tell them what we want to do? How do we handle this? Because potentially there's some conflict of interest of us going onto their turf by providing a hosted version of Snowplow.
Mm-hmm. On the Jitsu question, I'm part of their Slack, but I think that's about as far as any sort of like formal relationship with Jitsu goes right now.
I mean, Jitsu also does the same, and like their revenue is driven off of hosted versions of their software, so it would be the same issue, or yeah, same concern from Snowplow or Jitsu's end.
Cool. I think we're at time, so if there's no critical questions, I would say that we maybe can, like, there's the DMR, and I'm very happy for everyone. Like, I try to make it as reproducible as possible so that you can easily try it out on your own. If there are any questions, so feel free to try it out and also voice your questions there. I think that would be a good place to kind of document all the questions and start discussing around them so that we can figure out whether we want to pursue this further or go with Jitsu after all. I think from my personal point of view, we just need to go through these questions once now and then make a firm decision. Okay, this is the way we want to go.
Thanks for putting it together.
Great job. Thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. And yes, see ya.
Excellent,
Bye.
folks.